Have you ever felt exhausted by the constant pressure to explain your life to everyone, to share every high, every low, every move? What if the key to your peace isn't in telling more, but in telling less? Billy Graham once shared a timeless truth. There's power in privacy, and what you withhold might protect you more than what you reveal. You don't owe the world a front row seat to your journey. Just because people are curious doesn't mean they deserve access. In a world where it feels like every moment needs to be shared, documented, or posted online, guarding your peace might just be the boldest move you can make. Because peace, the kind that runs deep, that keeps you grounded, that lets you sleep at night, is one of the most powerful treasures you'll ever possess. And once it's gone, you'll feel the void in every part of your life. Look around. We live in a time where people are addicted to being seen, explaining every decision, justifying every step, defending every boundary. But here's the truth. When you live your life on display, you don't just invite attention, you invite interference. You hand over pieces of your soul to people who were never meant to carry them. And some of them, they're not looking to support you. They're waiting to study you, question you, even use your own words against you when the moment benefits them. Let me make it plain, privacy isn't weakness. It's wisdom. It's strength. It's power in its purest form. When you choose to protect your thoughts, your dreams, your struggles, and your healing, you're not being distant, you're being discerning. Because not everyone who claps for you is rooting for you. Not everyone who smiles is safe. Because you don't need validation from people who never saw your silent struggles. Some of you are bleeding peace because you're trying too hard to be understood by people who were never assigned to understand you. You're pouring your truth into ears that lack the maturity to handle the weight of your story. You're defending your progress to people who don't even know the price you paid to get here. And it's wearing you out. But here's the truth. When you start growing, when healing begins, when your purpose starts calling louder than your pain, your life is going to get quieter, smaller, more focused. That's not rejection. That's protection. And that's where we begin, in the quiet, in the unseen, in the private moments that shape who you are becoming. Because next, we're going to uncover why keeping certain seasons of your life hidden isn't just wise, it's sacred. Stay with me. Have you ever noticed that when your life starts shifting, when healing replaces hurt, when purpose becomes clearer, when you finally begin to walk in alignment, that God doesn't make it louder. He makes it lonelier. That shift isn't a punishment, it's preparation. Because there are seasons in your journey where visibility becomes a vulnerability, and exposure invites interference. You're not being isolated to be ignored. You're being separated to be shaped. Billy Graham understood this spiritual principle well, that divine transformation often begins in private, in quiet, away from the noise of applause or opinions. There comes a moment in every person's life where you must learn to stop announcing every breakthrough, every moment of growth, every answered prayer. Not because they're not worth celebrating, but because some things are too sacred to share too soon. When you expose your blessings prematurely, you risk them being polluted by opinions, jealousy, or misunderstanding. Some victories are not meant to be posted. They're meant to be protected. Let's be honest, we live in an age where people feel entitled to know everything about you. They want updates, explanations, visibility. But there are parts of your healing, parts of your process, parts of your transformation that are not up for public consumption. They are reserved for you and God alone. And that's not secrecy. That's sacred wisdom. Because the truth is, the more people know about you, the more they feel entitled to shape you, to comment on your life, to question your decisions, even when they were never invited to the process. They begin to speak over something they never planted. They start offering opinions on territory God gave only to you. He often preached that spiritual maturity is not about public display but private discipline. It's not about proving your faith through performance but protecting your faith through discretion. When you keep your life private, you don't diminish its power, you preserve it. You guard what God is growing. Because not everyone has the spiritual capacity or emotional integrity to handle what God is developing in you. When too many people have access to your story, the story begins to lose its weight. When your sacred moments become too common, they become devalued. The holy becomes ordinary. And people no longer approach your life with reverence, they approach it with criticism, comparison, and commentary. That's why you must learn to discern. You've got to understand that not every moment is meant to be shared. Not every insight needs to be spoken. Not every milestone needs to be documented. Some of your greatest breakthroughs will be the ones nobody ever knows about but you and God. And those are the moments that shape your character, not your image. See, there's a reason why Jesus often withdrew to quiet places, not because he was running from people, but because he was aligning with purpose. Solitude was his sanctuary. Silence was his strength. And if the Son of God needed private moments to refuel, refocus, and reconnect, how much more do we? Some of you are hurting not because of what happened to you, but because you shared too soon. You trusted too quickly. And now you're carrying the shame of having your sacred stories handled carelessly. You didn't just lose people, you lost peace. You lost the safety that comes from knowing your heart is protected, but you can reclaim it. You can choose today to move in wisdom, to walk with God without having to post about it, to heal without narrating the process. You can choose to close your mouth while God is still opening your future. Because privacy isn't hiding, it's becoming. It's letting the seed grow deep roots before showing its fruit. And here's the beauty of it. What God does in secret, He will reveal in His perfect timing. And when He does, there will be no doubt who deserves the glory. So the question becomes, how do we protect what's sacred without isolating ourselves completely? In the next part, we'll go deeper into what it really means to set boundaries, not out of fear, but out of purpose. There's something deeply powerful and deeply misunderstood about setting boundaries. In a world where sharing everything is glorified, where openness is confused with oversharing, where being accessible is seen as a virtue, many people don't understand the quiet strength it takes to guard what's sacred. But make no mistake, boundaries aren't about building walls of fear. They're about building walls of wisdom. Some of you are exhausted not because you're weak, but because you've left too many doors open. You've invited too many voices into your sacred space. And now the noise has replaced your peace. People are stepping into areas of your life they were never meant to enter. Not because they forced their way in, but because you left the door unlocked in the name of being transparent. Billy Graham often warned that discernment is just as spiritual as love. That wisdom is a shield just as much as grace is a gift. And part of discernment is learning to recognize who should have access to your story, your emotions, your process, and who should not. Let me say this clearly. Not everyone deserves a front row seat to your healing. Not everyone has earned the right to hear your dreams, your wounds, your progress. Just because someone asks questions, just because they're present, just because they show concern, doesn't mean they're safe. Some people come close not to comfort, but to collect. Not to build with you, but to study you. And if you're not careful, you'll start giving away pieces of your purpose to people who only came to satisfy their curiosity. You see, there are people who listen, not to understand, but to remember what you said, so they can quote it back at the right time, when it hurts the most. And when your trust is mishandled like that, it's not just your story that suffers, it's your spirit. That's why you must guard your oil of your anointing, your essence, your inner fire. Because when you share your vision with people who lack vision, they'll try to shrink it. When you share your calling with those who don't carry the same spiritual weight, they'll criticize what they can't comprehend. And when you give your truth to those who traffic in gossip, it will be repackaged as rumor. Billy Graham knew that not every battle is won through explanation. Some are won through silence. Not because you're hiding, but because you're honoring what God is doing in you. Boundaries are not cold-hearted. In fact, they are the warmest form of self-respect. They say, I know what God gave me, and I won't let it be mishandled. Some of you are learning this the hard way. You've poured out too freely. You've confided in people who weren't equipped to carry what you gave them. And now you're left feeling vulnerable, exposed, even betrayed, not just by them, but by yourself. But hear this, you can forgive yourself. You can learn. You can tighten the gate without hardening your heart. Because protection doesn't mean paranoia. It means stewardship. When you understand how valuable something is, your peace, your calling, your future, you stop placing it in reckless hands. You stop mistaking presence for loyalty. You stop assuming that familiarity equals trustworthiness. You start watching fruit, not faces. You start measuring consistency, not charisma. Boundaries are not just about saying no to others. They're about saying yes to yourself. Yes to focus. Yes to alignment. Yes to peace. And yes to the sacred space where God is still forming something in you that cannot afford to be disturbed. And that formation, it needs room to breathe. In the next part, we'll explore why spiritual growth often requires solitude, not as isolation, but as divine incubation. There's a reason why some of your most profound growth doesn't happen in the spotlight. It happens in silence. It happens in stillness. It happens when no one's watching, no one's applauding, no one's validating. Because privacy isn't just a preference, it's a principle. And Billy Graham understood this with clarity, that the deepest work God does in your life often takes place behind closed doors, away from the public eye, in the solitude where your soul can finally hear. You see, spiritual growth isn't loud. It doesn't seek attention. It doesn't announce itself with hashtags or highlight reels. In fact, the more authentic your transformation, the less likely you are to publicize it. Why? Because some things are too sacred to put on display. Some moments are too holy to be handed over to public scrutiny. The womb of purpose is not meant for public viewing, it's meant to be protected, nurtured, and guarded until the time is right. There are seasons, and you may be in one right now, where God pulls you back not to punish you, but to prepare you. Where He allows relationships to fade, invitations to stop, silence to stretch longer than you'd like, not because He's forgotten you, but because He's forming something inside of you that noise could destroy. You're not being hidden. You're being planted. And there's a difference. A seed that's planted looks buried to the outside world. It seems like nothing's happening. But underground, something sacred is taking root. Something powerful is breaking open. Something divine is being prepared. And if that seed were exposed too early, if it were dug up just for inspection or applause, it would never survive long enough to bear fruit. That's why privacy is not about shame. It's about survival. It's about allowing God to do a quiet work in you that doesn't need commentary, doesn't need likes, doesn't need approval. Because premature exposure can kill what was meant to thrive. When you're in that delicate place of growth emotionally, spiritually, mentally, you've got to recognize that the wrong kind of attention can become a distraction, or worse, a distortion of what God is doing. He never craved the spotlight. He carried it, yes, but he never chased it. He understood that character is cultivated in silence. That true strength is built in private obedience, not public performance. That the foundation of your faith must be dug deep, away from the crowd, before the structure can be revealed above ground. And when you look at the lives of those who endure, who remain steady through storms, who lead with integrity, in common, a season of silence, A period of intentional privacy where they let God shape them without the need to explain themselves. And maybe that's the season you're in right now. You're not overlooked till you're being overlooked on purpose. You're not behind till you're being hidden for the right time. You're not being silenced till you're being silenced for refinement. Because when the fruit finally shows, it won't need a caption. The results will speak for themselves. This is why your private life matters more than your public image. Because what's built in private is what sustains you in public. And when the storms come, and they will, it won't be your popularity that protects you. It will be your depth, your roots, your foundation. And those things are only developed in seasons of quiet and seen, intentional solitude. So let the silence shape you. Because in the next part, we'll talk about what happens when we stop explaining our lives and start living them with quiet conviction and holy confidence. There comes a moment in your journey where you realize not everyone is meant to understand you. Not everyone deserves an explanation. Not every step forward requires a broadcast. And when you begin to walk in that awareness, something powerful begins to happen. Your peace returns. Some of you are drained, not because you're doing too much, but because you're explaining too much. You're trying to justify your decisions, defend your boundaries, clarify your growth to people who were never assigned to walk that part of your path with you in the first place. You're wasting sacred energy on conversations that won't bear fruit. And what's worse, you're giving access to people who lack the maturity to handle the weight of your truth. You don't owe anyone a play-by-play of your progress. Some victories are too sacred for spectators. Some blessings are so deeply personal that explaining them would only strip them of their anointing. And here's the truth. When God is truly doing something transformative in your life, it won't always look impressive to others, especially in the early stages. That's why discretion is vital. Because premature sharing can attract unnecessary warfare. You see, the more visible you are, the more opinions you invite. And not all opinions come from a place of love. Some come from envy, some from ignorance, and some from people who are secretly hoping you'll fail just though they can say they were right about you. That's why it's dangerous to give everyone a front row seat. Because while some people are clapping for your breakthrough, others are keeping score, waiting for your misstep. Let's be honest, there are people in your life right now who only stay close so they can collect information. They ask questions with soft voices, but their hearts are hard. They don't want clarity, they want content. And if you're not careful, your vulnerability becomes their ammunition. That's why silence is not just an emotional boundary, it's a spiritual shield. It keeps the enemy guessing. It keeps manipulators frustrated. It keeps gossipers empty-handed. And most importantly, it keeps your relationship with God pure because you're no longer living for the approval of people, but for the alignment with purpose. He lived this out. He wasn't reactive to every opinion. He didn't chase validation. He knew who he was, and more importantly, he knew whose he was. That kind of confidence can't be faked. It's forged in private moments of surrender. It's born in secret places of prayer. And it's protected by wisdom that says, not everything God tells me is meant to be shared. Some things are for me and Him alone, so you've got to stop apologizing for being selective with your life. Stop shrinking yourself so others feel comfortable. Stop opening doors God told you to keep shut. Because the more you grow, the more you'll learn, privacy is not pride. It's protection. And as you protect your peace, your oil, and your calling, you'll begin to see the shift, quieter life, yes, but one filled with deeper clarity. In the next part, we'll explore how this spiritual clarity becomes your greatest weapon against distraction. As you begin to embrace a more private life, you'll notice something shifting. Not just around you, but within you. The noise starts to fade. The pressure to perform weakens. And what takes its place is clarity. A deeper, more anchored understanding of who you are and who you are not. It's in that space of intentional quiet that your discernment sharpens, not just about people, but about purpose. He often reminded us that when God speaks, He doesn't shout over chaos, He whispers into stillness. And many people miss divine direction simply because their lives are too loud. They're too entangled in the opinions of others, too distracted by comparison, too exposed to the chaos of overexposure. But when you begin to walk in privacy, you remove the distractions. And when distractions disappear, clarity begins. You no longer feel the need to ask for validation, because you're not living for the crowd. You no longer chase platforms, because your foundation is secure. You don't need to be seen to be stable. You don't need to be known to be anointed. Because clarity isn't about external visibility, it's about internal alignment. It's about knowing what God said, and resting in it, even when no one else understands. And here's the powerful truth: the clearer your purpose becomes, the smaller your circle will get. Not because you're becoming antisocial, but because you're becoming intentional. You begin to realize that not everyone can handle the weight of what you're carrying. Some people were fine with the old version of you, the one that doubted, that explained, that asked for permission. But when you step into purpose, you no longer live for approval. You live for assignment, and that assignment will often require you to walk quietly, to protect the vision until it's strong enough to stand, to carry what God is birthing in you without running back to share every detail. Because let's be honest, the wrong ears can kill a right idea. The wrong presence can poison a pure purpose. And the wrong audience can discourage what God has already confirmed. He was never afraid to walk against the current. He didn't speak just to be heard. He spoke when there was something worth saying, when truth needed to cut through noise. He modeled what it meant to move with wisdom, not impulse. And that wisdom flowed from clarity that came from time with God, not time on stage. Some of you are waiting for a sign, waiting for a confirmation, waiting for someone to understand you. But what if your next breakthrough isn't coming through a conversation, but through quiet? What if the clarity you've been praying for will arrive when you finally turn down the volume of opinions and turn up the stillness of solitude? There is strength in being misunderstood. There is wisdom in being underestimated. Because when people don't see your next move, they can't sabotage it. When they don't know what you're building, they can't compete with it. When they stop having access to your inner life, they lose the ability to distract you from your divine life. And here's what's beautiful: clarity creates confidence. Not the kind that boasts loudly, but the kind that walks humbly. The kind that doesn't need to shout because it's secure. The kind that doesn't chase attention because it already carries authority. In the final part, we'll bring everything together: the silence, the strategy, the solitude, and uncover how walking in divine privacy is not just protection, but preparation for purpose beyond what you imagined. There comes a time in every journey where silence is no longer seen as absence, but as authority. Where privacy is no longer mistaken for distance, but understood as discipline. And if you've walked with us through these words, you've likely felt the gentle tug, the holy nudge to pull back, to protect what's sacred, to cover what matters. Because the truth is, when you carry divine purpose, not everything can be public. Some things grow best in the dark. Some blessings flourish in the soil of secrecy. And what God is doing in you, the healing, the rebuilding, the transformation, it doesn't need a spotlight to be valid. It doesn't need a platform to be real. He lived a life that echoed this wisdom. He didn't seek the crowd found him. But what gave him lasting influence wasn't his visibility. It was his integrity. His ability to hear God over the noise. His refusal to trade conviction for attention. And that's what made his voice so powerful. It wasn't loud, it was anchored. It wasn't flashy, it was faithful. And that's the challenge for us. To choose privacy not because we're afraid, but because we finally understand value. To speak less, not because we lack words, but because we're guarding our witness. To live with quiet strength, knowing that not everything holy must be explained, defended, or displayed. You see, when you learn to walk in wisdom, you begin to realize that peace is not found in being understood, but peace is found in obedience. In moving when God says move, in staying when He says stay, and in remaining quiet when He calls you into secrecy. Because some of your greatest victories won't come with applause, they'll come in the absence of noise. In the space where it's just you and God, and that's enough. So let the world wonder. Let them guess. Let them speculate while you protect what's growing. You don't owe anyone access to what God whispered to you in the dark. You don't need to convince anyone of what He's cultivating in your heart. Because when it's time, when the fruit is ready, it will speak for itself. You're not being silent because you're weak. You're being silent because you're wise. You're not being private because you're hiding. You're being private because you're being prepared. And preparation, real divine preparation, never happens in the crowd, it happens in the quiet. So as you walk forward from here, let your life carry the kind of mystery that makes people pause. The kind of peace that cannot be shaken. The kind of discipline that doesn't need to be explained. And remember, what God is building in you doesn't need constant commentary, it just needs your consistency. Let your silence be strategy. Let your privacy be protection. Let your stillness be strength. And above all, let God be the loudest voice in your life, because when He finishes what He started in you, the results will speak so loudly, you won't have to say a word. A quiet strength in the end. A private life is not a hidden one, it is a protected one. It is a life that understands the difference between being seen and being secure, between being known by crowds and being known by God. And when you truly understand that, you stop craving attention and start cultivating peace. You stop explaining and start listening. You stop performing and start becoming. His life teaches us that privacy is not a retreat, it's a refinement. It's not a lack of courage, it's evidence of wisdom. The strongest people aren't the loudest. They're the ones who've learned to walk with purpose in silence, trusting that God's timing will always reveal what needs to be seen. So guard your heart. Guard your vision. Guard your peace. Not because you're hiding, but because you're preparing. Not because you're afraid, but because you finally know your worth. Let your life be proof that silence can speak, that privacy can protect, and that the deepest strength is found, not in being visible, but in being faithful. If this message spoke to something deep inside you, don't let it stop here. Take a moment to like this video, not for the algorithm, but because your peace matters. Share it with someone who might be losing themselves trying to be understood by the wrong people. And if you're on a journey of growing quietly, healing deeply, and moving intentionally, hit subscribe. This space is for you. Because sometimes the most powerful voices are the ones that choose silence, and sometimes the strongest steps forward are the ones taken without an announcement. Thank you for being here. Stay grounded, stay private, stay powerful. Thank you for your listening. Goodbye and see you in the next video.